Right.
Right.
Hello, everyone. I am Alex Lim, your host, and welcome again to AuthorStory, the home of authors and stories that matter. This episode's featured guest is Wendy Teasdill, author of Integrating Philosophy in Yoga Teaching and Practice, a Practical Guide. So, Wendy, welcome to AuthorStory. Thank you very much for being with us.
Very happy to be here.
Great, great, fantastic. Okay, so Wendy, well, first off, a little bit about your background. You're presently a yoga practitioner and teacher. How did you get involved in yoga?
Well, I started yoga because I had hepatitis, and I was told
Oh,
by the doctors that there's no cure for hepatitis apart from rest and proper diet. And
mm-hmm.
I'm not used to resting. I was a pretty
Okay.
active person then, and I am again now. But I would attribute my return to life to yoga. It was a discovery of prana, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Prana being energy,
Mm-hmm.
cosmic energy, if you like, that
Mm-hmm.
hadn't really featured in my life before. I just had energy, and then it was gone, and I was feeling pretty depressed. I started yoga and learned about prana, and it was just incredible. I started with pranayama, which is, specific breathing exercises that
Mm-hmm.
allow one to accumulate prana or energy,
Mm-hmm.
and it worked.
Mm-hmm.
And the doctors had not been helpful. They had been
Okay.
quite dismissive of me, and
Okay.
what I found was something that worked, which was amazing.
All right. Okay. And since then, you've really been involved in yoga. Now, you studied.
Yes.
I think. Correct me if I'm pronouncing it wrong. You studied Iyengar yoga. Did I pronounce
Nearly.
correctly?
Iyengar
Iyengar.
yoga.
Iyengar yoga.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
All right. So, I've interacted with some yoga practitioners and teachers, but they use a different kind of yoga from India. Iyengar. What is Iyengar yoga all about?
Iyengar. Well,
Iyengar.
Iyengar was a man,
Okay.
and he was born, I think, in about 1918,
Mm-hmm.
and he was taught by Krishnamacharya, who was a great yoga teacher. Iyengar was actually uh, Krishnamacharya's brother-in-law.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't taught an awful lot, but he certainly soaked up a lot of the atmosphere in the background. And long story short, he was eventually sent off to Pune in Maharashtra in India
Mm-hmm.
to set up classes there on his own. Iyengar hadn't had an awful lot of training, but as I said, he got what was vital, and Krishnamacharya was very influential and very well thought of teacher. So
Mm-hmm.
Iyengar basically developed his own approach, and Iyengar
Mm-hmm.
himself had a pretty sickly childhood. He wasn't in good health,
Mm-hmm.
and he developed his own yoga, as I said, and his own style of yoga involves a very precise approach to the asanas,
Mm-hmm.
long holds, and lots of discipline.
Mm-hmm.
And Iyengar himself was a very hard taskmaster. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about Iyengar because Iyengar wrote what is a seminal book, Light on Yoga,
Mm-hmm.
that appeared in the 60s,
Mm-hmm.
and it was Iyengar teachers who appeared in the UK. So the first teacher I went to was an Iyengar teacher,
Mm-hmm.
but I wouldn't call myself an Iyengar teacher.
Mm-hmm.
I did what Iyengar did basically. I
Mm-hmm.
did Iyengar yoga for many years.
Mm-hmm.
I went to Iyengar on quite a number of occasions in
Mm-hmm.
Pune in Maharashtra. I studied under him and his daughter and his son, daughters, I should say, and his
Mm-hmm.
son Prashant. And I got from them so much underpinning discipline and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But when I got pregnant, the Iyengar yoga just wasn't doing it for me because I was throwing up all the time. So then I started to develop a more personal style, and I have
Uh-huh.
continued to do that. So I would say my yoga is more of an integration now, because Iyengar yoga, like a lot of the yoga that came initially to the West, is very masculine. It's
Mm-hmm.
made for
Mm-hmm.
a masculine body.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got pregnant, the discovery was actually I'm in a female body, and
Right,
there are
right,
certain things I have to adapt. So I would
right.
say I integrate male and female requirements, and I've developed my own approach. And actually, at the end of the day, I think it's a good idea for everybody to follow Iyengar's example, if not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily the letters of his teaching, and for each person to develop their own approach, informed, of course, by great teachers such as BKS Iyengar and Krishnamacharya.
Right. Okay, got that. And that's the second thing I was going to ask you. I mean, you've written a book, Yoga for Pregnancy. You've made DVDs for pregnancy and childbirth. Now, I know I was thinking, how does one do yoga when one's pregnant? I mean, I know there's some pretty crazy poses that yoga does that are in yoga that can be rather challenging for someone who's pregnant.
Yeah, well, it's a good idea to forget about the challenging poses in pregnancy.
Okay, all right.
And so this is the point at which I had to. I mean, it doesn't even have to be a particularly challenging posture. So, for example, downward facing dog, which is a very generic yoga pose, and it appears in adverts. And it's just amazing how mainstream yoga has become. But I couldn't even do a downward dog when I was first pregnant because it just made me throw up. Well, now I know why. When I went upside down, I had the placenta. That's what attaches the baby's feeding system to my blood circulation. That was pressurized and put pressure on the vagus nerve, and that's why I went to throw up. Well, I didn't know those reasons then, but I knew that I couldn't do dog, so I did a cat instead. Interestingly, the skeletons of cats and dogs are not that much different, but anyway, cat position is not recognized in Iyengar yoga, apart from by some progressive teachers. I mean, you don't go on all fours. The only difference is that in cat you've got your knees on the mat, and in dog your knees are off. But anyway, but that of course took the pressure off the placenta. It meant that my spine was parallel to the earth, and in my mind I was doing a posture that was forbidden, and yet it was so beneficial. So anyway, to answer your question properly, I just gave a specific example, but to answer it properly, in pregnancy yoga, yes, there's a lot of postures that you would not do, but other postures such as the cat and variations that you would do, and which are really, really beneficial. So it's just a matter of understanding the underpinning reasons, which is what over the course of 3 pregnancies I did do.
Okay, all right. So it's really from practice then, practice and own experience. All right, cool.
And I would say, because I taught hundreds, probably, no, I could say thousands of pregnant women over the years, and it's not just my experience, because every pregnancy is a little bit different. So some aspects of pregnancy would be true for everyone, every pregnant woman. So every pregnant woman, in order to maintain the pregnancy, she has to have this huge influx of progesterone, which is a hormone which keeps the pregnancy going. So that means her body is more flexible and more able, if you like, to do some of the challenging postures. However, not a good idea to over-challenge oneself in pregnancy, because once the baby's out and the progesterone has gone, what you can end up with is overstretched ligaments, which are that connects bone to bone, and tendons, connects muscle to bone, which might not go well, which definitely don't go back. Muscles are designed to expand and contract. Ligaments and tendons are not designed to do that. So if you overstretch during pregnancy, you can end up with lifelong problems in the pelvis and pelvic floor and so on. So anyway, actually the pelvic floor problems come with the actual birth, so forget that. But what I'm saying is, yes, one might actually be able to do, say, a forward bend a lot better in pregnancy, but it's probably not a good idea to do so, because as well as all the ligaments and tendons and things sort of overstretching and not being able to go back, then you've also got the thing of just things getting out of kilter, like the vertebrae getting a little bit out of whack, and actually a forward bend can be, it's not so when pregnant women go, oh, this is so easy, this is lovely, it's actually best to step back a little bit and go within one's usual range of movement, motion, what have you. So it's just understanding that, and the fact that everybody is a little bit different as well.
Right. Okay. All right. Cool. So that's definitely a great overview of yoga while pregnant. All right. So,
yeah.
All right. So you've written several books. What made you decide to write books in the first place? I mean, from what I understand, you already have a successful yoga practice.
Mm. Um, the books, well, I've always wanted to write, and I always
Mm-hmm.
have written. So whether it be letters or emails or notes or books. I mean, I wrote my first book when I was 5, and my mother still has it somewhere. I used to write stories and sew them together and
Right?
illustrate them. So it's just something I've always had in me. I like, but in a way, it's for myself as much as for anybody else. So when I wrote
Mm-hmm.
Yoga for Pregnancy, for example,
Mm-hmm.
it was, I always described that book as the book I wish I'd had when I first got pregnant. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just something I love to do. I love writing.
Okay, all right. So now on to the book itself. First off, I'd like to address the issue of for whom this book is meant for, because the title includes yoga teaching. Is this book intended only for yoga teachers, or can any like yoga practitioner read it and get something from it?
I really hope that any yoga practitioner could pick it up and read it and get
Mm-hmm.
something from it. I also hope that, well, I mean, a lot of yoga teachers have been in touch and said, oh, they've really enjoyed it and they've used a lot from it, and they're working, they're using my book to practice and to teach. So, that's encouraging. I think again, actually, this book covers a lot of the questions that I had when I first started training teachers, actually,
Mm-hmm.
history and philosophy of yoga. I found it very confusing, but always what I've found is the way I make the bridge
Mm-hmm.
between the theory and the practice, and how I make sense of things that don't make sense, is to practice.
Mm-hmm.
And as most people come to yoga through yoga practice, um, I hope that it does make sense to
Mm-hmm.
both teachers and practitioners.
Oh, okay. All right. Cool. Okay. So I'd like to ask as well about the second aspect of the book, which is philosophy. The
Mm.
philosophies that you integrate, are these all philosophies that come from yoga, or do these come from other philosophies? Like, I mean, I'm thinking like, Greek philosophy, Western philosophy, that sort of thing.
Mm. Well, I don't include Cartesian dualities,
Mm-hmm.
Descartes, for example, I think, therefore I am. I don't include Greek philosophies, and I would have loved to have done, because I'm interested in philosophy. But
Mm.
at the end of the day, it's about yoga, and
Mm-hmm.
I think for a lot of us in the West, because we've been brought up on, maybe most people don't even recognize the phrase Cartesian dualities,
Right.
but we our language, the English language, is really predicated upon that kind of thinking, and the
Mm-hmm.
mind-body connection has only really come in the last. It's funny. I mean, it was 1921 that the first neurotransmitter was discovered. That was
Mm-hmm.
acetylcholine.
Mm-hmm.
Which, anyway, so sorry, not to digress too far, but is that mind-body connection rather than separation, which
Mm-hmm.
is really key to yoga. And even though the two main philosophies that we find in yoga, one is the all is one of
Mm-hmm.
Vedanta,
Mm-hmm.
and the other one is the separation of the divine or the transcendental from the worldly.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, confusingly as well,
Mm-hmm.
often the two overlap in the yoga world.
Mm-hmm.
So although I do go into that, at the end of the day, I think we all find our own path.
Right. Okay. So I find it interesting because I know yoga is a lifestyle. It's got a philosophy, and it seems that in this book you're integrating other philosophies than what you already have in yoga. Is this correct?
For example, sorry, what? Because I think I'm trying to cover the philosophies we find in yoga. Uh,
Okay.
I'm not sure about other philosophies, because when you say yoga, that's another thing. Do we mean hatha yoga, or do we mean yoga as in that all-encompassing integration? Because that the original meaning of the word yoga is to unite, or to yoke, or to
Ah.
join, or to integrate.
Okay.
So
Okay.
originally, asanas, the postures that we do, that
Mm-hmm.
wasn't meant by the word yoga. And in
Mm-hmm.
fact, it was the same. So what you find in the Vedas is the word yuj used to denote the harnessing, say, of a horse to a chariot or an
Mm-hmm.
oxen to a plough. It was
Mm-hmm.
that conjunction. And then that image got taken on. You find it in the Bhagavad Gita. So the mind is difficult to control, Arjuna, says Krishna.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to, just like wild horses, but if we can tame the wild horses of the mind,
Mm-hmm.
then we can go forth and enjoy some kind of peace of mind and
Mm-hmm.
comprehension of the world in general. So he's not talking about yoga as a yoga practice that we do on the mat at
Mm-hmm.
that
Mm-hmm.
stage, even though the word yoga is used quite a lot in the
I see.
Bhagavad Gita. So later on, yoga came to include and even to dominate the practice of physical exercises, which they're not merely physical.
Mm-hmm.
They encompass mind, body, spirits, and emotions, and everything else.
Mm. Okay. All right. Okay.
Did that answer your question in the end?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting because I mean, this what you mentioned really gave a an insight, particularly to those who are not familiar with yoga, what it really is all about. I mean, a lot of people they limit their knowledge of yoga to like, okay, this doing this position, this kind of breathing, but it really is a lot more than that.
Mm, mm. And so many different styles of yoga and schools of yoga to suit different natures. So, for example, the Samkhya philosophy, which I mentioned, they talk about the three modes of nature, the three gunas,
Mm-hmm.
the fiery mode, the resting downward mode, the sweet mode, and the material. Well, look at the seasons of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Spring, summer, autumn, and winter, they fall into those three categories. Spring and autumn are transitional.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so basically we have creation, maintenance, and destruction, the
Mm-hmm.
modes of nature. And each of us, we have personalities and proclivities that fall into these categories. And what we'll find in yoga, there are different schools and different approaches that suit us. So if somebody's saying, "Oh, I don't like Iyengar yoga, blah blah blah,"
Mm-hmm.
well, there's two possibilities there. Maybe Iyengar yoga is just what they need,
Okay.
actually,
Okay.
because often it's the thing that we have an aversion to, is what we don't want, is that which we need, or it
Hmm.
could be that they're quite right. And no, Iyengar yoga is not the yoga for them. There's many approaches to yoga, I think, and this is also a point made in the Bhagavad Gita. So many approaches to yoga, and each one of us will find our own way.
Right. Okay. Okay. So about this book, I mean, what is essentially this book all about? I mean, from what I understand, this is like application of philosophies to present concerns, present problems. Is this correct?
I
Contemporary issues, I mean.
I think the contemporary issues. I think what happens with contemporary issues is that we get new insights when we practice yoga in whatever
Mm-hmm.
form it takes.
Okay.
So I'm not saying that we find the answer, but we find answers. Maybe the questions disappear. We find new insights, and it is through practice that we find these different points of view.
Mm-hmm. Right. And of course, these the philosophies that you mentioned that are brought into yoga. These help. How do these help out those who would, who would seek answers or investigate into these questions that they are concerned with?
Well, the questions are often very much determined by our social conditioning, by our background, by the milieu in which we've been brought up, by the papers that we read, the people we speak to, the people we're friends with on Facebook.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So often our news feed, as it were, not talking just about online, but in who we come in contact with, that's all very conditioned.
Mm-hmm.
And I think where yoga takes us is to somewhere unconditional. So it might be you can find every reason in the world to dislike a particular person.
Okay.
But if we can get beyond our own personal dislikes, for example, and see that person objectively and understand their background, then we might have a different take on the question. We might bring in a bit of love and compassion and have a whole new approach to a problem, in the process of which the problem just might completely disappear, or the problem might turn into an interesting question. Things change. I think what yoga does, it makes things which seem so black and white, it allows them to become liminal, to change.
Right.
And it's not just so points of view, they're always subjective. It makes us I find that the practice of yoga is very helpful in cultivating not just objectivity but also feelings of wholeness, looking for points of rapport rather than points of separation. And at the end of the day, it's not the view so much that matters, it's more the heart, the beating heart, and can we slow it down and make it work for good?
Right. Okay. Okay. All right. So these are interesting points, Wendy. And I mean, they seem to be they seem to be pretty. I mean, they're born out of your experience. So, can you give us our listeners, sort of example of how this progression came about? Just sort of like a case study of how yoga helped you or one of your students deal with an issue or a question that they had.
An issue or a question. Well, going back to the beginning when I first started yoga, as I said, I had absolutely no energy from the hepatitis, and then I actually started my practice with pranayama, and the pranayama gave me energy back, and I went from a state of feeling suicidal to completely embracing life and all it had to offer. And I really feel that every breath I've had since then, since that first pranayama breath I took, has been a gift. And I can't tell you individual stories of students apart from the fact that I have many, many, many. I had a text just a couple of days ago from somebody saying how the practice has completely changed something in her life. And it's ongoing. I think it's this capacity for change. It's the key to unlocking the mental cages in which we sometimes find ourselves imprisoned.
Right. Okay. All right. So this book is essentially a practical guide. I don't want to give too much away. I mean, people have to read this book. But can you give one example where this is a practical guide for someone who is progressing in yoga or is dealing with something?
Yeah, I find the body is a good stepping stone, or you could say a philosopher's stone, or a point of transformation. So, okay, one example would be with the pelvis. So, female and male pelvises are very different to one another.
Right.
The male pelvis is fixed and narrow, and so that means that a male would stand if they want to keep their, have their feet hips width apart. The male feet would be closer together than the females, because the female pelvis is designed to contain and nourish and ultimately deliver a baby. So a female pelvis is more mobile, more flexible, and in pregnancy, yes, at the point of delivery, that's a good thing. The female body has to expand to accommodate the baby. But at the end of the day, we want everything to come back together. So I already covered the matter of the progesterone in pregnancy. So anyway, male and female pelvises, very different to one another. So in Iyengar yoga, for example, I was always taught to have the pelvis placed in such a manner as to be actually in a way that suits a male pelvis, in a way that doesn't suit a female pelvis.
Mm-hmm,
Now, the
mm-hmm.
pelvic region is, so I've adapted, and I give suggestions for female pelvis, and
Right.
there's different ways. You can be really cautious,
Right.
and or be quite gung-ho, and a female doesn't have to be pregnant
Right.
to change her approach to trikonasana. Now, trikonasana, I call it triangle pose, where you're standing in a particular way, but it does all impact on the pelvis.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
This pelvic region, physically, we've got the place, it's the interchange, the sorting house between the upper body and the lower body. The pelvis takes the weight of the upper body. It translates messages down. We've got the sciatic nerve going through there. So anyone who's ever had sciatica, I hope they will have been to a physio who's suggested different positions which have released that sciatic nerve. Anyway, point I'm getting to is that in terms of the yogic body, the pranic body, if you like, the less tangible body, but the body that we touch through practicing pranayama, in terms of the chakras, then we have the Svadhisthana chakra. So Sva means self, and Stan is, well, like Uzbekistan or Rajasthan or Pakistan, means a country. So it's our own country, if you like. It's our own territory. And getting to know our own territory is what really informs our yoga practice. So, so doing yoga, it's really important, I feel, that each person knows just how much strength and just how much flexibility exists in their pelvis at any given time. It's never a fixed thing. And hopefully the liminal state is gone through in order for each person to be. So I think it's about self-discovery, and I do think the pelvis is quite a bridge between that which we're told and that which we understand from within, and we each have to make this bridge. But Svadhisthana chakra, getting to know your own self and how to manage your own self, is pivotal.
Right. Okay, cool. I got that. Okay. All right. So, when in the last minute or so of this interview, are there any last words of wisdom you'd like to share to maybe inspire our listeners?
Oh, just keep breathing and get on the mat. And it's an endless journey. It's an endless journey, and we each have to make it for ourselves. But I do hope that people will enjoy reading the book as much as I enjoyed writing it. That's all I can say.
All right, most certainly. All right, great. Okay, great. Okay, then, so in closing, then, our guest is Wendy Teasdill. Her book is Integrating Philosophy in Yoga Teaching and Practice, a Practical Guide, and you can find it on Amazon. So, Wendy, thank you very much for being on AuthorStory. It was really great being able to speak with you.
Well, it was a pleasure speaking with you, Alvin.
All right, you're welcome. All right, everyone, so check out Integrating Philosophy in Yoga Teaching and Practice, a Practical Guide, and while you're at it, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for all the people and all stories we'll cover in the future. So catch you all next time on AuthorStory, the home of authors and people with stories that matter.